What's up, everyone? My name is Nate Livingston, and today I just want to chat about the effects of rising sea levels, past and future. Rising sea levels are impacting coastal areas significantly, especially things like the ecosystems and the value of the property in those coastal areas, to be specific. Ecosystems and value of the property in those coastal areas. We will kick off by going over a study on how major flooding due to sea level rise can impact home rises. Then I will dive into short and long term fixes for impacted coastlines. After that, we'll explore a variety of different things, like why coastal lagoons are so vulnerable, and why even a few inches of growth can turn into major floods. We will also look at how fast sea levels are actually rising, and then we'll figure out why. Finally, I'm just going to wrap it up with some simple steps communities can take now. My goal is to give everyone a realistic picture of what it's really like so people can imagine how all this affects many things we care about, including our environment, local business, and our neighborhoods. The economic impact of rising sea levels on coastal property. Okay, so this Ortega and Tasmanar paper from 2018 looked at how much extra flood risk actually changes what people pay for houses near the water. They gathered data on thousands of home sales along the U.S. coast, comparing places that got a little bit higher flood risk over time to those that did not. What they found was pretty straightforward. As predicted, flood risk went up even by small amounts. That means the sales price dipped by around 5 to 8%. So basically, just think of it as buyers saying, if there's a higher chance my basement's flooding, I'm going to offer less. The cool thing here is they controlled for other factors, like local income and the general housing market trends. So, it's really about sea level risk. Bottom line is basically that flood risk isn't just a number on a map, it shows up directly in people's wallets and whatnot. And moving on to the next slide, short term versus long term adaptation strategies. This is Guthrie's 2021 study on adaptation strategies. So just imagine you live in a beach town. I mean, like actually like around the sand. So like you're worried about giant seawalls costing hundreds of millions of dollars, like in your backyard. But you also don't want your town eaten up by waves and whatnot and getting destroyed. So Guthrie's idea is basically, why don't we just use a two-phase approach? Phase one is short-term fixes, like just pumping extra sand on a beach every few years, or something like that. Yeah, it's cheaper up front and gives you breathing room. While meanwhile, you can like plan for phase two, which is would be a permanent seawall or a raised boardwalk. Once you've got the money and better data. So I mean, his model basically showed that over 30 to 50 years, this stage plan can save communities and around 15% compared to doing the big project immediately. So, I mean, the major takeaway from this is that you don't have to bet the farm all at once, basically. Buy time first, then go big when you're ready. So, yeah, then moving on to the next slide, coastal lagoons and sea level rise. Basically, let's just talk about the coastal lagoons. That's those calm water zones that are trapped behind barrier islands. Kareska, Frisia, and I think Rolovink in 2016 did a deep dive on how rising sea mass, um, oh no, on how rising seas mess with these spots. So whenever the seas rise, these lagoons are impacted heavily. And lagoons are like nature's little nurseries for fish and act as buffers against storm surges. So the review of about 30 studies found that if sea levels climb just half a meter up to 70% of lagoons could possibly face erosion or just complete habitat loss. And that would be huge. Like, not only do we lose fish and wildlife, but we also lose income, the locals who fish, and all of that. One tricky part is that the lagoons change slowly, though, so a lot of problems can sneak up on us. So the authors say that we need better monitoring, like putting sensors in the water and like nature-based solutions, such as maybe restoring marsh plants that soak up wave energy. Something like that line, keeping lagoons healthy. It just isn't how eco-friendly. It's good for local economies too. So then moving on to the next slide, the rate of global sea level rise. Okay, so from Smith's 2024 paper, the speed of sea level rise has doubled over the last 30 years. Using satellite data, they found we went from around 1.8 millimeters a year in the 1990s to another 4 millimeters a year in the 2010s. That might sound tiny, but doubling the rate means if you thought you had 100 years to deal with your beachfront house like gradually sinking, now you might just have 50 years compared to 100. And that's a huge loss for a lot of people in all those communities that survive on that and thrive on those on the coastal areas. I mean, compounding small rises can make storm surges hit higher and higher, and that also is horrible for the coastal areas. Like the main question was figuring out what's driving it, and those are two big things. That's melting ice from the Greenland and Antarctica ice sheets, and warming oceans expanding as they heat up. That's about it. Smith's work is basically just a wake-up call that this isn't some far-off future. It's happening right now, like as we're speaking and doing all this. So we need to really take it serious and try to figure out ways to figure it out. Moving on to the next slide, extreme sea level events and flood risk. Finally, Pollock's 2022 study zooms in on extreme flooding. You know what they talk about, a 100-year flood. Well, Pollock shows that with only 2.2 meters more average sea level, what used to be a once-in-a-century flood could happen every 10 years. So we could have a flood that's only supposed to happen once every 100 years. It could happen every 10 years now because of our oceans rising. And that could cause so many people out of their habitat, their ecosystem. They lose their familyhood, their lifehood. I don't know. It's just, yeah, it's wild. He ran flooded model simulations for coastal areas and found that even small increases in sea level crank up flood frequency very dramatically. So for you and me, that means roads and parks that flooded once a generation could end up underwater a few times each decade. So our local park or near the coast, could be underwater. Yeah. So it's not just graduated beach erosion. It's sudden, like disruptive floods that cost big money and wreck people's lives. So, and the big takeaway is that small increases can lead to major flooding. So communities really have to plan now based on those predictions. And then when you get down to the preparing for the impact of sea level rise, so what do we actually do with all that information? How do we make a point to stop it? So what we figured out is that first, town needs to update flood maps and share them openly, not hiding anything, so people can all be aware. Second, planners should use that phased adaptation idea. So start with quick, affordable fixes like sand nourishment or living shorelines. Then move to like the harder defenses when you've got data and funds, like seawalls and all that. Third, integrate nature, restoring marshes and lagoons to keep natural buffers. Fourth, try to involve the community early so people understand the risk and the cost. And finally, just build equity in every step so poor neighborhoods aren't the ones left unprotected. Action means now, less heartache later. So they might call to action, but basically key takeaways. So rising sea levels pose serious risks to coastal communities, infrastructure, and ecosystems. Immediate action is needed to protect at-risk areas and prepare for future impacts. And the call to action is that the government and local communities must work together to invest in sustainable solutions and adaptive strategies. So the bottom line is that sea levels are going up faster than ever, and even tiny changes can turn into big floods. That's bad news for homes, roads, businesses, and natural habitats. But we can't just sit back. Immediate action is a must. Whether it's beefing up beaches, restoring all the wetlands, or maybe even just being as simple as updating building codes. Communities and governments need to team up now because the longer we wait, the more expensive and painful it gets. Let's use the science, the economics, and the on-ground feedback to build coasts at last. Thanks for listening, and we can hopefully figure out a way to stop the sea level rising in the future. Thank you.